All right. So thank you for joining today. Wanted the opportunity to kind of share some of the things that we've been working on, but kind of the information that we've gleaned over the past couple of years when it comes to artificial intelligence. For those I don't know or are meeting here for the first time, my name is Phil Magnuszewski. I am the Chief Innovation Officer here at Infused Innovations. I advise and work with organizations, typically business leaders, on the topics of emerging technologies, of which, as you can imagine, artificial intelligence is the primary topic of discussion today. I also chair the New Hampshire AI Task Force as well. So I have, I think, a unique perspective between, I think we've done over 25 AI projects over the past couple of years, but I also have had hundreds of conversations with organizations across all sectors and sizes, understanding where and how they're using AI, what their concerns are, what their approaches are, where they're falling down, those kind of things. So what we're going to go through here today is really just kind of an understanding of, like, if we were kind of to distill what we've learned and what we've heard, how do you approach AI in a way that gives you a better chance of success? Next month, if you do follow the series of webinars, we're going to talk more specifically about return on investment and how you can think about that. And that is at the topic. That's a topic that every leader is kind of interested in right now, but we'll go through this today. These are purposely small, these webinars in terms of number of attendees that we kind of invite to them or allow into them. So make it collaborative. If there are questions along the way, Zach, if you want to do me a favor and just kind of keep track of if I miss anyone who has a hand up, just kind of flag me down and let me know. Does that sound good? Awesome. All right. So getting into it here. So, one of the things, and I think this may be a somewhat unique point of view from the Infused Innovation side, and definitely from me, is that, we think about, or historically have thought about, AI and how do we get people to use it, or how do we become an AI-powered organization? And I would ask, or just present to you for your consideration, kind of a slight shift in the way that we're thinking about it, right? Rather than looking at it like, how do we get more people to use it so they become personally more productive, or the group becomes more productive? I think what we're missing here is the bigger picture is, what should your organization be able to do because AI exists, right? We're talking about a concept called organizational capability, right? It's not so much that, Sally in accounting becomes more productive, she can do more things, that kind of stuff. But with this technology, with other technologies that are coming down the line as well, what can we do that we previously, either through whatever constraints were there, can we now do as an organization, right? We're now theoretically opening up all this information internally, bringing external information to bear and stuff. So how can we rethink or reimagine the organization in a way that takes advantage of that today? And we see that today in the startup community, right? So startups that are coming out of the gate, they're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and they're like rethinking everything out of the gate, right? So the challenge is, if you're an organization that's already in business today, how do you do that while continuing to run at 80 miles an hour? So with that comes, how do we measure success for it, right? And I think by pivoting and shifting the frame of reference, instead of looking at, and a lot of organizations do this today, how many people are using the tools that we bought, right? How much time are they spending? What kind of prompts are they running? Those kind of things. And there's a lot of, I would say, tool focus maybe that we're seeing in that space, versus if you look at organizational capabilities on this front, or from that perspective, our decisions that we're making across the organization getting inherently better. We've been using, probably like a lot of folks, if you're doing proposals for clients, you're getting at least a first draft put together with AI, which is awesome, because now the time that myself or a colleague spends on building a proposal is now on thinking, okay, are we addressing things the right way? Are we thinking holistically about our client's business? Are we integrating third-party information where appropriate as well, right? So it allows us to do things, I would say at a whole different level than we could before. Coordination between departments, is that getting better? Is that getting faster? Can teams do things that they couldn't do before? And then this one at the end here, I think, is probably one of the most important, is that as the world changes, can we respond more quickly to those changes as they're coming through here as well? So the pivot is not just theoretical in nature, but how do we now think about the impact on the organization? And the other thing too, and I don't know if your organizations or have thought about this as well, is that when you get into these projects or trying to bring AI into the organization, it starts, and we'll get into this in a little more detail. It starts, very focused maybe in a specific area, but I think where some of the conversations just don't happen is like, what are the needles that we're trying to move? What dials can we turn, and where are we trying to get improvements on certain parts of the business? And that will tie into our conversation next month about ROI. But I think that sometimes we're kind of jumping into this whole thing midstream without giving a kind of a fair, holistic, and strategic thought ahead of time. This is just kind of an iteration or a kind of visualization of kind of what I was talking about. Typically, it's coming in, someone likes the tool, or a CEO has come in and said, hey, look, we've got to be doing something with AI. Let's get started with it. And it's kind of just handed to a group or a team or an individual. And we kind of say, okay, well, I need to get ChatGPT, or I need to get Claude. And then maybe there's some thought around how do we develop a pilot for a specific use case. But what we're seeing is that rarely are those, not rarely, but in not as many cases as we would like these days, it's not reaching production, right? It's still sticking at an individual level. It's still sticking at, at a fraction of what the impact it would have on the business. And this is something that we're trying to contend with and to deal with, because there is a point now where we are in the marketplace where every business leader is asking, what's the return on investment? And quite frankly, I think, and candidly to this group too, is that the pricing, right, it is becoming an issue, and it's going to continue to become an issue. To this point in time, a lot of the pricing around the models or the tools are subsidized still, if I might say it that way, by the VCs that have invested in those. So we're not seeing what the actual cost is going to end up being for this yet. The prices are going to continue to go up. They have to, right? These companies can't continue to hemorrhage and lose money forever, right? So something that we all need to be aware of. And here's just some data points. Some of the ones, this Gartner one is a little bit older, but 48% of AI projects were only 40% moving from prototype production. Another one here is a movement from 17 to 42% of companies that are starting to scrap some of their AI initiatives. AI projects are abandoned. A lot of that stuff is around data and some of these other things that we'll talk about as well. And then another one from Gartner here is that agentic AI projects are the expectation is a lot of them are going to be canceled, again, because they're not showing return on investment to the organization. Again, this is kind of where things stall, and just kind of, I think this is the last slide on this particular topic. We're excited about it when we get started. We'll buy something, we'll pilot it. There are some power users that really get into it. And I'm sorry, Eddie, you had a question.
Sorry, this is fascinating. Can you comment on it? I'm sure it's hard to generalize, but I don't know if you can shed some light on when you say that people are abandoning these projects because the agents are not returning, the agentic workflows or whatever are not returning on investment. Like, what are are there like failure modes or is it just that the token cost is basically people are looking at that saying there's no way we could scale this?
I think there's two sides to that. So I think where you're getting agentic AI into the system at scale, they're starting to realize the cost of the tokens associated with that, right? That's part of it, where you can actually get them to work at scale. But I think the other part of it, and probably where we see more of the abandonment of those particular, like they're building agents, and maybe they're building agents that are trying to tackle too much in some cases, or their data isn't quite right for that as well. And because of that, they're not able to get predictable outputs from those agents so that they can scale those things.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And I think, and that's the one of the, I was just in a conversation with the chief innovation officer from a town up here in New Hampshire talking about this exact thing. Like, how do you try to get these things in a state where I know that every time I put in X, I'm going to get Y as an output kind of thing, right? And you have to kind of lock these things down. Your data's got to be in the right format, that kind of stuff. So yeah, Eddie, hopefully that answers the question for you.
Yeah. And then if it's okay if I ask one more follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
I guess given the token costs, are you seeing, I guess maybe among the more exploratory of your customers, are you seeing a push towards, for example, using their Azure environment to host what are effectively local models, so that they're paying for their Azure utilization, but not for any LLM token utilization, because it's a local model as opposed to one having to access an outside server?
Yeah, it's a local model, but you're still paying for tokens in Azure to some extent, right? For that, unless and that's when you're consuming it as a service, right? Kind of thing. If I can maybe take that one step further, I think where I see organizations thinking about what the future might look like would be with taking a model that I can get, whether it's open source or otherwise, Eddie, and then putting it, to your point, in my, whether it's in an Azure environment, my VPC, if you will, or on-prem at that point, so that I can get around those token costs as well. So you've got to pick the right service, you got to pick the right product at that point, and make sure that you're eliminating that. But yes, there is a lot of talk happening in that space right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yep. So again, stop treating AI. That's one of the biggest takeaways. It's not just a technology project. You're changing how your organization can fundamentally operate, right? So I think everyone in this call has probably done IT projects, familiar with it, buy the technology, deploy it, maybe train some employees, and then kind of watch how much that technology is being used versus really establishing technical ready, like doing the upfront work at the beginning of all this is truly important. I'll talk about AI literacy in a second, but understanding workflow. I can't tell you the number of times that I'll go into an organization, and if you get folks from the same department, and one of the things we do is we'll do interviews with departments to understand how work is actually happening there. You'll get different answers depending on who you ask for a specific question about how something gets done, how something gets, like, how do you do something versus one of your peers. So I think getting a common understanding is one of the things that you have to look at as well. And from that, there's opportunities to redesign. We'll talk about prioritization investments and those kind of things as well. But again, my encouragement and my kind of soapbox here is to not think of it as truly as a technology being integrated, but as a way to unlock what you can do in the organization, because it truly is that game changing. So here are 4 questions every organization should be able to answer going into any kind of AI initiative. Is, A, are we ready? And we'll talk about that as well. And we do a lot of work in the Microsoft ecosystem. Eddie, you're well aware of that. I think Dave, you're aware of that as well. Is making, like, is your environment ready for it? And we'll talk about some of the specifics around that. Do people understand what's possible? Like, this is, to me, one of the most overlooked opportunities for successfully implementing this in your organization. We do a fair amount of tool training, right? Meaning this is how you use Copilot. And during this, we'll talk about, we'll sit with clients and we'll show them kind of what you can do with Copilot and Copilot Studio and that kind of stuff. But what we're not doing in a lot of cases, we're not teaching individuals how to just, like, what is AI? How should I be thinking about it? How does it work? What should I be putting into it? How should I be monitoring the outputs, or questioning or being critical about the outputs? Like, just the operational pieces of it. A lot of organizations aren't doing that piece. And it's like you're giving someone this incredibly powerful tool, but you didn't give them, it's like, I think of like hunter safety course, right? You can get a gun. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It's a dangerous tool. It can also help you hunt, those kind of things. But if you don't go through how to use it, what are the like kind of the safety concerns around it, that kind of stuff, like you're missing a big piece of what's important to make a responsible, secure usage of that particular tool. Understanding where AI can create the most value, just pumping the tools out there and giving them to people, but not thinking strategically about where it's going to have impact in the business. That's a big deal, and we'll talk about that. And then, the roadmap, or what do we do first, and then where do we go from there, kind of thing. We'll talk through that in a little more depth. I'll skip through this, and but the sequence is important, right? You have to understand what your kind of foundation is from a technology standpoint, what the technology looks like, what might need to be done before you want to implement artificial intelligence in the group, in the organization, what your AI leaders, then making sure that there's a common language, a common lexicon across the organization, and an understanding of what the technology can do and what it shouldn't do, just as importantly, and then working through use cases, and that sets you up for roadmap. I think the important thing about this is that this is a framework. As we go through the next set of slides, these will be very specific to your own organization, right? You can take this, go run with it, but all the details are going to be very specific to you, so you're going to have a very specific plan to your organization at the end of the day. So we'll talk about the attendant, or I'll just say environment assessment. That's kind of a Microsoft bit of nomenclature there, but these are the kind of areas that we typically would recommend focusing on, right? Starting with data, right? Understanding your data footprint in the organization is probably the killer, right, for most organizations, because you can get excited about what the tool can do, but if your data is not ready, or you have, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have a good sense of what that is or how that looks, or if it's not organized the right way, you're going to have a horrible time trying to get people happy with what they're getting out of these tool sets. Mapping where sensitive data lives as part of that. And we'll talk about in just a second this whole concept historically of security by obscurity. So if someone didn't know it was in a particular folder, no one, it was kind of safe because no one was really going to search for it. That changes when you bring AI into the organization. Also, when you're thinking about the data side of it too, there's almost like a dual path you're going down with this, right? Because on some level, and you may have to go back, right, based on what I'm about to say here too, is like, as you're going through the use case identification and figuring out how AI is going to be used, like that may inform how you structure your data, right? And I'm thinking mostly in this particular case about unstructured data. SharePoint libraries are kind of the biggest source of data as these organizations start to implement the technology, but there's structured data sets, other things you can hit as well. But getting your data right is hands down probably one of the most important things you're going to end up doing. And be prepared to spend time there, right? People may have left the organization, people may have, forgotten where stuff was and all of those things, but I use the term data curation. The data curation process is so extremely important to this. In looking at your environment as well, understanding what you have from an entitlement and licensing standpoint. What subscriptions do you have, right? If you're going to deploy things, if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, for example, you may have, depending on your subscription level, you may have access to a lot of the security tools or data governance tools in there. You may have access to some of the Copilot tools in there as well, those kind of things. But also understanding what do the subscription or licensing models look like. It's a good thing to, at this point, kind of understand what those are going to look like. So as you start to get further down the line, you kind of know what you're going to, be looking at in terms of pricing and quantities and those kind of things as well. Permissions and governance. This one's important. As I mentioned before, when you, let's say, for example, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, there are ways to, using like the Teams versions of ChatGPT or Claude, you can like bring those securely into the environment, right? Using things like SSO, but you can actually integrate that into like the Microsoft Graph, right? But by doing that, if you haven't explicitly for an individual said they cannot see that data, what the AI agent is going to do by leveraging that graph is it's going to see everything in your environment, right? And it's going to assume, unless you're explicitly not saying that, let's say Eddie can't see this HR folder, it's going to assume that Eddie should have access to it, right? So there is a process and a set of work that needs to be done to make sure our permissions appropriately assigned across the organization. And stale accounts, stale data, like this is a cleaning up exercise. And again, there are ways to accelerate this and to do it so it's done at scale, but something that you're going to have to be ready for. And then this last one here, this is something where I put this in here is it's an opportunity to assess if anyone is using these technologies in your organization today. When I sit in some of these roundtables and have conversations with clients, one of the biggest questions is, are they, sometimes they'll throw up their hand and say, I don't know if someone's using ChatGPT, like a free version, and then are they copying and pasting information from an organization owned system and putting it into like a personal, like free version or of the technology. If you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, by the way, a lot of this stuff you're able to control, whether with Purview or data protection for AI in there as well. You can lock these things down pretty quickly across the organization. So there are tools here in place, but if you're not leveraging, whether it's a Purview or some other tool to kind of look at that, there are cloud apps that you can do, like a cloud application broker that you can use to look at this stuff as well. Like understanding who's using what, to at least understand where you're might be vulnerable from a security or IP leakage perspective. That's something you want to do as part of the assessment as well. Again, lock it down. I will also say, though, on a positive side, if you're looking, I had a client do this recently where they did this, and they used the information to say, look, okay, I see maybe, Peggy in accounting is using ChatGPT. It's their own version of it, that kind of stuff. It's not a corporate owned application. But if Peggy's using it here and Davey's using it there and somebody is, like, those are you're identifying your champions potentially and your power users in the organization. So like, I wouldn't go after those folks necessarily and say, look, it's horrible, you shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. But be thoughtful about it, because those could be your greatest advocates as you're starting to roll the technology out across the organization. Are there any questions on the assessment piece of this? There is a bunch of work that goes into this, so just going to share that out. We talked about that, and then at the end of the day, what you want to walk away with all of this is, what does my data hygiene look like? And you can score it any way you want. We do it our way, but you can get a score for each of these things and say, hey, like, my data hygiene needs work, and it may not be across the organization, but maybe it's for a specific department. You want to understand your licensing. Again, you're giving yourself a scorecard that you can then use to say, hey, look, okay, well, either it's going to be good enough to kind of get you moving forward to it with some specific use cases, or you know what, we really need to spend some time over the next 3 to 6 months fixing these things before we move forward with them. All right, AI literacy. So this is kind of getting everyone, as I mentioned before, on the same page. A shared understanding of what the technology is and what's possible with it. So there is an expectation gap that we see across the board. A lot of times the leadership might come in and there's this whole concept that we're going to be able to replace headcount or not have to hire a whole bunch of people. And there's kind of that side of things, which is kind of an overshoot. And I'll come back to that in just a second. Then there's, sometimes the IT group says, you get some folks there who might think that that's just another chatbot, right? Nothing, no big deal. Nothing new or interesting to see here. And then you have a set of employees within the organization that are just confused, right? They don't know, am I supposed to use it? Am I not supposed to use it? Sometimes there may be an AI policy in place. Sometimes there isn't. So there's the idea of is getting everyone on the same page, so there's a common understanding of what the mission or what the vision of the organization is with AI, and to kind of alleviate some of these fears. I'll talk about the leadership one for just a second there, because that is it's a huge statement that sits in there, right? So replacing of headcount. The leadership teams have an incredibly challenging job in terms of trying to, and knowing that they need to bring this technology in to be competitive over the next, 2, 5, 10 years, whatever that looks like. But also that there's a lot of fear in the organization that, oh my gosh, they're bringing the technology in to replace, half the staff, kind of thing. It's a fine line that needs to be walked. I think an organizational leadership team needs to be honest about what their vision is, and they need to hold true to that, right? The moment that you break that trust with your employees in the organization, you're going to have a very difficult time getting them to adopt it any further. I would also say that the reality of this is, where everyone was saying, oh my gosh, in 2026, 2027, half the white collar workforce is going to be gone. It is not playing out that way, right? We're seeing, first of all, AI is not being adopted as quickly as I think a lot of leaders had hoped for, but also the things that it's doing, it's taking off, I think, a lot of the administrative or routine or repetitive tasks off the plate. But it's like my day has not gotten any lighter as a result of it, and I don't see it becoming lighter for a lot of other folks who are using it on a regular basis, right? So that replacement piece is not happening as quickly or as deeply as I think you might see in media or some of the news out there as well. So just keep that in mind. And then, Eddie, to your point earlier about the cost of these things, there's going to be a equilibrium that happens with it, and also a reckoning that happens where, oh my gosh, like I have a developer that's spending $1 million a year in tokens. What if I just brought in another developer in, right? And you're going to find what that balance is going to end up being as a result of it. AI literacy, I'm passionate about AI literacy because I do think it's important for us to understand some of the fundamentals before we get into what the technology can do. What do you want to do when you talk about your organization about it? You want to talk about the capabilities of it. How does it work? What are the limits? You want to talk about, things like, if you're using a free application, you're the product. At the end of the day, we've all heard that adage before, but you don't want your information being used to retrain a model. How do you protect your information? What should you not be putting in these tools? Things like PII or, social security numbers, those kind of things as well. What's safe to put in there as well. Where is it going to fit in actual workflows? I think that sometimes there is an over optimism that it's going to change my world tomorrow kind of thing, but that's not the reality. And as we talked about with some of the agentic stuff, like you've got to get a lot of things right in order for it to be super effective and for it to scale. How do you prompt it? We talked about prompt engineering. That was the hottest thing forever. Now that's kind of gone away, and it's really just context, right? I use on my phone, I use the voice to text all the time. Like I rarely will type stuff in anymore because I can give it just a bunch of context. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's where I'm trying to get to. Here's all the details, and I can give it that stuff. But then also the verification. This becomes one of the most challenging pieces for the organization, and trying to get the individual or the employee to kind of understand, okay, this can hallucinate. We do our best to try to keep that from happening, but it still can happen. We want to look at the references that it's providing as some of the output, right? And then go back and take a look at that, right? There was a study that was done. It was with one of the big consulting firms. I won't throw them under the bus, but they did an internal study. And in terms of the percentage or the amount of time it was done by a percentage, but the amount of time that someone actually goes back to check references. Big global consulting organization. This is about a year ago. Anyone want to take a guess to how often someone goes back? What percentage of the time someone will go back to check a reference?
20%.
It was less than 1% of the time. Less than 1%. what I'm about to say, I'm included in this. Like we inherently can get lazy with these tools. We get comfortable really quickly. Like, oh my gosh, that pop looks great. Well, it's going to copy paste or it's going to flow into this other system and that kind of stuff. But we really have to encourage our people to be critical about the output, and be able to go back and fact check some of these things. And then again, when you're grounding people in what the technology can do, they'll pick better problems to chase with it because they'll have a better understanding of where kind of the limitations are of these things as well. The other things, if you're capable of doing it, and if you have someone who's, and I'm assuming most organizations have folks who are exploring AI tools or technologies, like kind of maybe prep up some low-hanging use cases in terms of how you might use Claude, how you might use Copilot or Copilot Studio. But what I found is that sometimes the technology can feel a little abstract. And at the end of the day, if you can show them, especially close to a use case that might be for their specific department, if you're doing it that way, it gets the light bulb, or gets their kind of imagination going, like, oh, okay, I kind of see how that works. So you ground them in what's possible, from how the technology works, and then kind of show them some of the things they can do with that. Then when you get to that next session, right, where you're doing the interviews, I'll talk about in just a second, there's more of a grounding or more of an understanding of how they're thinking about their world with it. Does that make sense? Excellent. All right. Use case identification and prioritization. This one is really important, and even if you're you think your team has a really good understanding of how things operate, I highly recommend you going through this exercise across the organization. So what we'll typically do is we'll spend time with each department, and we're looking at it from various levels. You want to understand what the department's role is in the organization. We want to understand what the individual roles are within the department. We want to understand what the workflows are across the department and between departments. Like, what are the inputs and outputs coming out of that department? And then what are the tasks that constitute those specific workflows, right? When we get to that level, then we can get a really good understanding, okay, they're telling us that this workflow, like they're getting something. I was with a client the other day, and they were talking about their just cash management process, right? They get checks for some things, and it goes to this person, and then this person gets through, and it might be a week before they get a check into the system, kind of thing, right? So just understanding all those intricacies, all the tasks, all those hops that happen between, within a given workflow. Understanding that allows you then to figure out, okay, like, you're not going to boil the ocean with AI typically, but if there is one piece or two pieces of that workflow that I can collapse or leverage AI, or in a lot of cases, right, AI isn't maybe the answer. It's just some sort of workflow automation, right? If you're familiar with, Power Automate or some other, workflow management tool, a lot of the things can be addressed by that, but you need to kind of know and get in at this level. And these are some of the questions that we ask. Where is there friction? Where do you feel you're spending too much time? What's tedious or repetitive? And then on the flip side of that, one of the questions we'll get into, like, if we can give you a blank sheet of paper, if you could wave a magic wand, how would you kind of redesign these things? How would you redesign the work you're doing? That kind of stuff. And then doing that gives us an idea of both where things are today, and then you're hearing from the people actually doing the work, and you will always get opinions on how work can be done in an organization. So asking that second question of, like, how would you like to kind of see things is always super helpful. And then once you get that information, you're going to go through the process of you'll do it with your internal team. You may have folks from technology and the business unit, and you'll say, hey, look, okay, here's what we heard. Here's where the friction is. Here's where the opportunities are for us to maybe insert or test or pilot AI into those particular workflows. And then you're going to score them, right? You're going to want to score all those things. So, if you're going across, you typically, at a minimum, you'll typically get 3 to 5 opportunities out of the gate in each department. You want to score them across various vectors at that point, right? is one of the biggest things. I have tenant readiness there, but really is like, do I have the right data? Is my data in a state that is going to support what they're looking to do or what we want to do with AI in that particular, and sometimes it's not. So you want to be careful with knowing what that's going to be. Risk, right? There's a huge difference in risk if you first of all, if you're in a regulated industry or not, right? But also there's different levels of risk associated with an internal effort or an internal use case versus something that's going to be customer facing, right? So you want to determine what risks are associated with that particular use case. Level of effort, what's the man hours, money, licensing, any other costs associated with that, and what's the effort for that? And then you want to be able to articulate a value, right, to the organization, to the business value to the organization. Just a quick question for the folks here in the group today. When we talk about value to the organization, I think one of the blind spots that we see is that a lot of organizations don't have an understanding for what a workflow costs them today. Would you agree, disagree, have a different opinion on that?
Definitely.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more, and like I said, in next month's webinar. But that's one of the things. So when you're trying then to look at ROI, so this becomes the value to the business becomes a little fuzzier, if you will. So we'll talk about ways to kind of hone that stuff in again next month. But you'll get yourself a matrix here. This should look. You guys have probably seen similar versions to this before. Anything up and to the right, those are great places to start. That's where you want to spend your time. And then along with that is you want the ability to define and ask, add some context to each of those use cases as well. But what I was looking to get to was, where did I have that? Did I skip it? My apologies on that. So you're gonna get a prioritized shortlist, but I think it's in the next session. It is in the roadmap section. My apologies there. You're gonna get a roadmap, right? And you're gonna have a list of activities. You're gonna look for the ones that are maybe far up and to the right. You're gonna be able to see some of these might need to be sequenced, right? Depending on the use case and how those use cases kind of interact and integrate together. Time frames, you're going to establish time frames for them. Some may be quick, some may be out of the box. So one of the ones I love, if you're using Copilot today, Copilot 365, is researcher. A lot of departments are doing marketing research or other types of research that they want to do, competitive analysis, those kind of things as well. Researcher out of the box, like you can be up and running and using that, and like as soon as you get allocated a subscription for that. Right, so you can get almost a near immediate value from some of these tools. You also want to make sure you're talking about and thinking about resourcing. So what is the life cycle of this particular use case going to look like? Do we pilot it with one person, a small group, before we kind of bring it beyond that? And then dependencies are super important in this too. How many systems is it going to touch? Again, the data, we talked about that before. The other thing I'll mention too is that with some of the use cases, depending on how aggressive you want to get with your approach, and this is the way we've been doing it internally here as well, is this quick iteration, right? So for example, you may build an agent, right, for a specific task in your organization. And you know what? I can see the vision of it. I know where I want it to go, but you know what? I'm just going to connect it to one data source right now, right? I want to start to make sure that I can get consistent outputs. I want to make sure it's giving me information back that's usable as well. And then once I get that, I can add my second data source. It might be a connection to a CRM system or something else. But there's this iterative loop. And these projects, I can tell you, like they're relatively small for the most part. And I'll talk about that again in just a second. But there's the ability to provide, and you should be thinking about providing quick wins, right? What's the immediate value, the medium term and the long term value on these things. So these don't have to be, and typically aren't $1 million projects, right? But there are things you can get started with pretty quickly. And this is the one I wanted to get to here, is like, this is the quick wins, right? So you want to be thinking about portfolio, right? So you've gone through the prioritization matrix. You have, let's say, 15, 20 particular use cases. We had done this process with the client before, and they came back and they said, oh, we got 25 use cases. It's like, all right, let's go back through and make sure you have them prioritized correctly and you have the right data and those kind of things as well. But think of it as a portfolio. Like, you want to show quick wins back, like whether it's research or something else, but what can we give the business back to say, hey, look, we heard what you're doing. Here's where the technology can help. Here's what it enables, right? As an organization as well. Do the quick wins, ship something pretty quickly as well. And then there are other things you're going to have, things that might take a little bit longer, more sophisticated agents or agents working together, or maybe there's an integration that needs to happen with a large ERP system, right? Those things might take a little longer. And then, and the far right, this is where this takes a longer time to get to, but this is where, in a lot of ways, you're going to potentially end up building your moat as an organization, right? So we do a fair amount of business with investment banks, just by happenstance. But one of the things we talk about there is like, how do you build out your own proprietary data source, right? In terms of pulling in your own data, bringing in third-party data, synthesizing, doing some initial analysis, trying to find the needle in the haystack kind of stuff, right? That's a strategic initiative for those. And that's not something you're going to get from Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT. Eddie, that's something you're going to build in your Azure environment, right? Something you're going to build. You're going to bring in your own data sources. You're going to customize the logic and like all those things. And that is something that you're not going to get value day one, and you're going to build towards that over the course of time. But it's something you want in your portfolio, because all of these things, the quick wins, the stuff out of the box, at some point, everyone's going to be able to do that. So what you're constantly looking for is, what are the use cases and what are the approaches? And that's why I talk about, thinking about the organizational capabilities. If you think that way, it's going to force you to think, okay, where and what can I do that I couldn't do before? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
And again, just bringing it home, and then we can have any open conversations or questions that you guys have. This is a foundation. It's not a phase. If you can do this, right, you get your foundation in place, you understand what's what and what's where, you understand how business happens in your organization, you start setting this roadmap, you can go through this process on a quarterly, semi-annually, annually basis as well, and continue to do this. But this, if you can follow this framework, will set yourself up for success with artificial intelligence. And then this is some questions just to ask yourself as you're going through and getting ready for this. You get the recording. Everyone will get the recording from this event, so you can go back and see this as well. Technical readiness. You want to make sure that our people ready. And I just realized something for those. Anyone come from the old ITIL world? People, process, technology. Some things never change, right? Those are kind of the things that we're looking for and trying to get an understanding of within the organization. And these are the things to do. You can do this tomorrow. You can do this over the course of time, but these are essentially the things you want to be doing. And we've gone through that quite a bit. And then feel free to connect if you have any more questions or reach out. But hopefully that was helpful. And again, I'll pause and see if there are any other questions or conversations that the group wants to have.
That was excellent. Thank you. Really helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah, Phil, thank you for all that information. It's ironic. We had just literally reached out earlier in the week to Jeff Wilhelm.
Yeah.
And had a specific question, and then your email came through like 3 hours later, and we thought, well, is he? And we've only known each other for 25 years. Like, is he messing around with us right now? But it's funny. So, but this is exactly, this is perfect. This presentation, this slide deck is exactly what me as Widestream and our team is looking for to work with our clients. So appreciate it very much.
Awesome. Glad we could help, Dave. BJ.
Phil, I wanted to bring it back to the slide where you mentioned high value and low risk and begin there. Share a little light based on your experience that it is high value, yes, and risk is low. How about effort and setting yourself up for failure when you are looking at driving some high value? And then a lot of people in the organization said, see, I was telling you this will not work. And to some extent, even tech folks are like avoiding the AI thing because it's a headache for them.
Yeah, no, that could be a whole different vector of it. But you know, we have our own proprietary approach in terms of how we weight each of those things. So there's context, right, to all of those things. It's not as simple as here's the business value, here's what it's going to cost to do, right? There's weights on each of those things and risk and those kind of stuff. I hadn't thought too much about it now in terms of the cultural piece, but something worth considering if you're rolling it out, especially in organizations that, let's just say, aren't ready, like are still using maybe analog phones right on the desk kind of thing. So, and you have them, they're out there, right? So, but I think there's some thoughtfulness in terms of like, you know, your organization best, and you can understand which of those are going to be more important.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. And of course, you know, going for the important high value actually signs up a lot of people at the top, especially the sponsors. The other thing I loved about one of your slides that this is not a tech thing. Well, I believe in that. I'm a coach who comes out of 29 years of tech and worked with a lot of tech companies itself with their leaders. My point there is what I'm noticing is still the CTO takes the decision about AI. This is a natural paradox. There is internal conflict because the chief strategy officer puts their head in, but the technology officer controls everything. And it doesn't allow the business folks to now, because earlier stage IT was deterministic. AI is not deterministic. It could be at the most predictive, which our friend from Health Outlook will like. It is predictive, yes, because it is fluctuating. So business folks can understand the context more than tech folks. Please, anybody who want to share their thoughts. But I thought this was interesting when you brought out that slide.
Yeah. Stella, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to you and to everyone. And my only question I have is, I listened to it. It's just a lot of information. Is how does a small business get started? Like, where do I start? I mean, a little overwhelming, just the way it is. I mean, we're just an import business, but this we're half in technology, and I know AI is not technology, but we're half in and we're still half out. So we're still not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and you know, I guess the shameless plug is that we help organizations try to figure out where to get started with it, right? I spend time advising organizations on how exactly to do that, leveraging kind of what I showed here as well. So even if you don't use us, there's an opportunity you can go and use this framework. I think it's tested and proven. And Stella, I'll tie your question also into BJ's question, is to kind of wrap that off as well, is that, I think a lot of times, and it's every organization is different, right? Like we all know that. There are organizations where the CTO has a lot of authority and control over what the strategy is. But BJ, I can tell you, and maybe it's just the organizations we work with, almost all of these initiatives are being driven by the business side. Right. It's the C-suite, it's the business leadership teams. Those are the folks that are saying, look, we know as a business we have to do something. And whether the CTO is initially on board or not, like this is a business, like this is a strategic business decision to pursue. So part of what we do is we try to bring both of those worlds together to make sure, and almost like a translator between those two sides of the house, right? Everywhere, as it were. But again, 90% of what we do, it's driven out of the business.
I see. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you get a CEO on board, a COO on board, if you get that team on board, we can typically, navigate the technology side, because that's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the CEO calling the shots, right?
Okay, so I can contact you when I'm ready, and then you can tell me, contract with us however we have to go forward.
Yeah.
Because we're a small business, and with the CEO, and we also empty the garbage. You know what I mean? We do a variety of things. So,
Yeah. No, I understand it, and we work with. We do this. This is the same process we would follow with a small business of 10 people as it would with 1,000 people, right? Again, it's a tried and true practice. The only difference, the only type of business that is a little bit different approach is a startup, right? Because you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and you can in essence design what you want from day one. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, there's no legacy to contend with at that point. Yeah.
It's true. Okay. Well,
Yep.
thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Any other questions, and anything even adjacent to this? I'm happy to. I got a few more minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions or give you thoughts on.
I just thought it was great, Phil, the presentation, and because the biggest questions are usually from clients that really have no idea what AI is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
And to really have them understand it's not about AI. It's about what is it you're trying to accomplish within your organization, and maybe AI can help.
Yeah. 1,000%. And it's a hard fight sometimes, Brian, because it's a shiny object. It's so sexy. It's like, it's so easy to focus on that. And did you see what the latest model can do? And like all those conversations kind of take us further away from the conversations we should be having around it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I would add, I think you had a slide that was questions that surface use cases. I think just as an organization or individual teams going through those questions, and thinking, okay, how could we use these AI tools to address these, one or more of these use cases? A surprising sort of byproduct of that is oftentimes you find that you don't necessarily need AI, but you could use other really valuable automation tools, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of sort of awakens you to that possibility, and then you think, okay, I can actually just string these operations together.
Yeah.
And and maybe there's an opportunity to incorporate AI, but at the same time, that might not necessarily be. So that you can find ways of being more efficient just having gone through that exercise.
Yeah, and that is, I'm glad you brought that up, because if I could highlight something too, when a CEO typically comes back from a trade show or reads a magazine article or something, it's like, we've got to do AI, and everyone kind of lumps everything into AI, right? These days, but you're 1,000% right. It could be something as a quick little automation that you're building for something, or a integration from one data source to another. Like, there are a whole bunch of other things, to your point, Eddie, that end up coming out of it, even though it starts as an AI conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have one question. What do you think is the most, so maybe this is more for those of us who are in kind of like a Microsoft environment, but I guess what would you regard as being a very dependable way of staying abreast of like the newest, say, Copilot innovations? So, just for example, I only recently did I start to appreciate all the things you can do with Copilot within SharePoint, right? And so, but that capacity has been there the entire time. It's just I wasn't aware of it. So I'm wondering where one should look if you want to say, okay, like what's in the Microsoft environment? Here's like things I should be aware of.
There's the Microsoft Learn stuff, and I think they actually expose an MCP server now, Eddie, with the content, so you can tap into that. We have one of our guys on, Dave. Dave, if you're still there, I might pick on you for a second and ask how you continue to stay up to date with all the Copilot changes.
Yeah, so they have a lot of channels where we're able to just listen out and see what the latest things and updates are. Specifically, if you're interested in specific areas of the stack, like SharePoint and things like that, they have blogs and things like that that you can actually stay tapped in with. And
Okay.
then on the other side, outside of just the Microsoft stack, things that are going on around in general AI, obviously keep your ear to, the ground with social media and things like that. You'll be able to see what kind of thing other businesses are doing, or what kind of features or updates come out in that manner. I think on our team we also have experts who are also very in tune with that kind of thing. We've given seminars and workshops and things like that to give people updates on like the latest. I believe some of you may know Alex on our team. We've done, workshops with him where, if some people have enough people that have interest and want to know what's the latest on,
Yep.
SharePoint and AI, we'll, give them an hour and have Alex come do an engagement there to get everybody up to speed.
And Eddie, what you could even use AI to help. You could create like a routine or a task, depending on what you're using, whether it's in the Copilot ecosystem or Claude or OpenAI. You could create and say, look, I want a research agent that's going to go out and do every week. I want the top 10 things, or I want to know everything that you can find that's changed in Copilot. And you can get a summary. You can walk in on Monday morning and then they'll give you this is exactly what's happened, what we found. You can give it specific sources you want it referencing of, you know what I mean? You can do that. And I think that's how I keep up on a lot of the research that's going on, because it's such a amazingly vast field. And there are so many different pieces to this beyond just the models and stuff. I would curate it that way. As you come across things as well, bring the either, whether it's a white paper or it's a URL, bring that into the agent and let that, set it up on a routine to go off and do that stuff for you on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We're just about at the top of the hour. I'll do a last call for questions.
Phil, not a question, but just a statement for Eddie and Stella. If you do have the opportunity, I would highly suggest reaching out to either Phil directly, what Dave Kissy just mentioned there about working with the Infused team, and Alex it's a slam dunk. Even if it's just an hour, it is definitely worth it. So little plug there, Phil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that.
But honestly, they're a great team to work with.
Yeah, Eddie's a little familiar too, so
okay.
I think
right.
yeah.
You'll
Awesome.
get
Stella would love
Dave's-
that. Yeah.
You'll get Dave's invoice at the end of the month.
I will. I'm gonna have to. Yeah, we'll get you credit, Dave.
Phil, just a
Awesome.
quick yes or no question.
Yeah.
Do you see increase of the use of open weight models or open source, whatever we want to call it? There was a question before of bringing it in Azure. You see a lot?
I don't see usage yet, BJ. I see or hear a lot of talk about it. Yeah. I think we're going to get there. I think you're going to see, the way that these things are rolled out, people are using the models that they know are going to work, right? And let's get the model to work and that kind of stuff. And then you can do an optimization type exercise with it to maybe grab a IBM Granite model, which is an open weight, anything from Hugging. You can then start to evaluate. And if you're in Azure, you can there's actually a whole thing in Foundry that allows you to compare models in there as well. That's pretty cool. Yep.
Zuckerberg mentioned very recently last week that Meta is going to increasingly want to provide some open source models. So I think with their weight, with all what they do, it's very interesting.
I think the one thing to keep in mind, and we'll finish on this note, is when someone says it's an open source, open weight model, understand how they're defining that, because not everyone is defining that the same way. Not everyone is exposing all the information, how did we train the model, kind of and so you're getting a little, it's not as transparent, I guess, across the board. So just do your homework on that front. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate
All
it.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take
Great
care.
session.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.